What's good, YouTube? It's my boy Squid back in another Squid video. YCS Bologna just happened yesterday, and there were a lot of cool decks and tech choices for this particular event. So I thought, let's take a Squid video to look at exactly what the heck was played. In terms of decks, starting at the top, Fire Kings. This surprised me entirely. I didn't think Fire Kings would be that good. I mean, we know they're good in the OCG, but that's after Phantom Nightmare, after they got Populous, after they got the new Snake Eyes stuff, and after they also got the Bonfire from the Maze of Memories. The deck is a completely different monster. I did not think that it would do anything beyond Regionals, but apparently the deck in its current iteration is enough to take 3 to 4 spots in the top 64 of a YCS with over 2,000 participants. And I mean, I'm sure the people were not reading the cards fully. They did not understand the cards, and they were probably reading them as they went along. That probably contributed to the deck's success, but not to downplay the deck at all. Ponix is still a one-card pseudo combo. We still have cards like Garunix establishing a huge board off of just one card, and then, you get insane follow-up off the Barong Search, and then also recursion off of the Ponix. So there are a lot of ways that this deck actually benefited in the metagame and a grind game state. And, I'm surprised, but I'm also at the same time, I guess it's not really surprising. If people don't really know what the cards do, rogue decks will take spots. So, yeah, excited to see what this deck does next. I mean, once we get the new support, it's definitely going to hit hard. Next is Labyrinth. This actually blew me away because I didn't think the deck was that good, but it took the third most represented spot of decks in the top 64 and a whopping 9 different Labyrinth decks that actually topped, which is nuts. We saw different variants, decks that played the traps with a bunch of the furnitures, and of course, Big Welcome Labyrinth is just like the most powerful card in that deck, just setting up your whole combo. And we also got the Butler as well, which came out in Agov. A lot of people were actually forgetting about this card, but it seems that people are finally taking advantage of Arias and seeing that, this card is actually really, really good. When you pair it with a regular trap in your hand, like a Daruma Cannon, you can actually set it directly during your opponent's turn and start playing and disrupting them literally on their turn. So this deck was surprisingly very, very powerful, and we are getting transaction rollback in the next set, which is insane because you can discard this off of furnitures and utilize its effects from the graveyard, as well as Rumpel Toifo, which allows you to prevent a monster card from being special summoned a certain card name, or using the effect in the graveyard to banish it when you discard off a furniture, prevent a monster effect from activating. So this deck is definitely going to be here for a while, guys. So yeah, definitely prepare your side deck. CENTUR-IONs are apparently very competitive to the point where 3 to 4 of these actually made top 64 as well. Now, the deck obviously has the going first 1.5 card, which ends in the Calamity Lock, which is just devastating because it effectively skips your opponent's turn. But the thing is, people realize that this card is really, really easy to interact with if you can prevent them from summoning it out. The thing is, this card actually can miss timing because it says when this card is synchro summoned, you can activate this effect. So it has to be Chainlink 1 being summoned, right? So if you summon it off of Crimson Dragon as a Chainlink 2 or higher, then you cannot actually use the effect. You would miss timing. So when people are using cards like Forbidden Droplet, Cosmic Cyclone, Ghost Ogre, whatever the heck, to even try and disrupt the Crimson Dragon or the field spell, that means that Calamity is just not coming out. But the CENTUR-ION players at top were already prepared. They were going in with the mindset of potentially making the Cosmic Blazer Dragon during their own turn alongside the Legacia, and then on their opponent's turn, they'll summon out yet another Crimson Dragon and then go into the Calamity Lock. So it was protected by an Omni Negate. And when you have an Omni Negate out, chances are this Calamity is going to resolve. So yeah, really interesting to see that deck did pretty well. Now, in terms of cards, there were obviously Droll and Lockbird. This is just really, really popular. It seems like everyone was signing it. And actually, surprisingly, no Mannadiums topped this event. Yeah, this deck was completely outclassed by the existence of Droll. I guess, people just, when you get Drolled over and over, people just cannot play this deck at all. You cannot get Drolled like 12 rounds in a row. It's just not going to happen. Sure, sometimes you can play through Droll, but most of the time it's going to be very, very rough, especially when your opponent has a board. So, and the fact that it was a Europe YCS, like, it feels like more US players were interested in Mannadium and really just playing around with them during this format, whereas in Europe, it didn't seem like a lot of players were actually on the deck for whatever reason. There's a bit of a rift in the metagame. And then, of course, Flu actually didn't top at all, thank goodness. I think Droll being very prevalent as well contributed somewhat to that. And I'm just glad that this deck is not there because it's so annoying. But it did do pretty well at the LA Regionals. I think it got 2 top 8s, so as an aside. Now, another card that was very popular in player side decks was actually Ghost Bell and Haunted Bench. And I think a lot of people realize that this has a lot of dual utility against certain cards. Like, you can stop things like the Bystials from coming out. You can stop them for a turn. If you're playing a deck like Tearlaments, you might actually want to benefit from something like your monster. This is also decently good against the Big Welcome Labyrinth, which is one of the main offenders. A lot of players kind of seen Labyrinth was somewhat on the map, and they said, hey, we have this generically good card that hits a lot of other decks, but it also hits Big Welcome Labyrinth, which is one of the best cards in the entire deck, right? So, why not just stick a couple of Ghost Bells back into the deck? This card does a lot for certain decks being a level 3 body as well. You know, you can go into things like Baron de Fleur on the off-chance. So I've always been a huge advocate of this card, and I'm glad that it's seeing more play. I think it will see more and more play as we see more decks come out, like the Fire Kings finally becoming meta. Obviously, Ghost Spell does hit them as well. You're able to hit the Kirin, so they can't resurrect anything from the graveyard, and also cannot get the pop effect, which is the non-targeting pop upon the resolution of the effect. So, you know, there is a lot of utility with this little Ghost Spell, and I'm hoping that more players will pick this up for the next format, because I definitely am going to myself. Phantasmae was also a very popular underdog card in a lot of people's side decks. I've been a huge advocate for this card. Like Joshua Schmidt said in his deck profile, this is a very feel-goodsy card. You always feel good when you have this card and you're able to resolve it, because you're always going to fix your hand, draw into more hand traps, and it's like you're mulliganing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically. This is not a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game mechanic. We cannot actually mulligan in this game, but with the existence of Phantasmae, there is a chance that you can now mulligan and somewhat sculpt your hand. So, you know, this is broken in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! That has no mana. That's why I've always loved this card. You get a free body that also has a onboard negating of any targeting effect. So it's just such a nice card to have. Guys, if you haven't played Phantasmae yet, just start putting this in your side decks. There are a lot of link decks that are good right now, and this is the type of card that you definitely want to see in your opening hand when you do not start the game, because yeah, it puts on pressure to your opponent and it starts pushing back tempo towards their direction. Bistio Runic was a huge deck. Well, you know, the only deck that was probably played by Joshua Smith in the entire event, but he ended up winning. And Duality was in part one of the biggest cards against that deck's favor, because this card is a engine piece that allows you to dodge popular targeting removal cards or negation cards like Effect Failure, Infinite, and Permanence on things like your Hugin. And it's just so good when you can actually chain a Duality, being a quick play spell directly, and then you can summon out something powerful. Well, the 3 targets that Josh decided to play was for Hugin. You would tribute Hugin and summon Alvain, the Essence of Vanity, which is actually a tuner monster, level 2, so you can go into Synchros potentially. One thing to note is that it's not an effect monster, so you cannot actually make SP Little Knight with him. Now, I didn't even know that either, but it's good to know. The other cards that he was going into was using Lubellion, which is a level 8 light dragon monster, to go directly into Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, bypassing the need to synchro summon at all. This is a great card that burns your opponent for infinite damage in time, and yeah, it also wipes the board in the grind game situations. But the most unique one of them all that I thought was interesting was tributing Gary the Runic Fangs for something like the Fabled Unicorn, which I have not seen for years, since I used to play this in my 2009 World Championship over the Nexus game cartridge on a Nintendo DS. Back then I had a Fabled deck, and this card actually does a lot. One thing to know is that this card says, while you and your opponent have the same number of cards in your hand, negate all cards and effects activated by your opponent, and if you do, destroy those cards. Now, this is actually not a activation effect. This is a continuous effect. It's absolutely not. So what you can actually do is chain Duality to the activation of your opponent's card, and then let's say you have 4 cards in hand, your opponent has 3 cards in hand, you tribute out the Gary, you can now chain a Runic from your hand or a Bistio from your hand or anything to make your hand size become 3, and then on the resolution of Duality and then Unicorn summons out, it negates that card that your opponent is activating, which is nuts. It negates and destroys without activating. So yes, monster effects, spell effects, trap card effects. Your opponent is basically under a blanket Omni negate that's not once per turn, as long as you can control your hand, so it equals the amount of cards in your opponent's hand by continuously activating Bistios or Runics in chain to your opponent's cards being activated. Then you are probably going to win the match. So yeah, this is just a really, really interesting thing with Duality. On top of that, Duality has the effect where during the main phase, you can actually banish it to recycle a light and a dark monster back into the extra deck, and then also draw a card. It's a lot of recursion. It does a lot for the deck. I'm so excited to see this card finally being played, because I've always thought it had some potential. Up next is another hand trap that I thought was really interesting. I knew about this for the longest period of time, but I never really had a chance to test it because I haven't been going to any events recently. But GIZMEK Uka, the Festive Fox of Fecundity, a lot of people were on this at the YCS and also the regionals that happened in LA. This is a older hand trap that was somewhat used during the period of Halka Firebrax way back in the day. What this card says is each time your opponent normal special summons a monster, you inflict 300 damage to them, but the important part of the effect is the secondary trigger effect, which is a hard once per turn. It says, if a monster is special summoned from the main deck except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then if this card is normal or special summoned, you can actually target one face-up monster your opponent controls, special summon one monster from your hand or deck whose attack equals its own defense with the same attribute as that monster. Predominantly, what we want to use this against is the Unchained matchup. Yes, the Unchained deck is very, very popular, and what you can actually do when Shavara is summoned is special summon out the GIZMEK Fox, and then use the effect to target the Shavara, and special summon out this bad boy, the Barrier Statue of the Inferno, which happens to be a monster whose attack equals his own defense. And of course, the Unchained deck does not have any other Fire Link monsters in it, so they literally cannot play, right? Like, all of the Unchained Link monsters are effectively dark, so they're not going to be able to go up into the Unchained Soul of Rage, nor the Unchained Soul Lord of Yama, and they are going to have to do their best to get rid of these two bodies that you're going to start your turn with, which is very hard for the deck to deal with, right? Like, a lot of people have actually dropped Book of Moon, and no one's really playing Forbidden Droplet or anything, so it's actually very complicated to interact with this beyond something like an Ash Blossom, preventing it from special summoning the Fire Statue directly from the deck. And if a player is not really familiar with how this card works, they might not even Ash Blossom it, and then they stare at the Fire Statue and go, oh, right? So this is a really, really cool tech that a lot of people were specifically using for the Unchained deck matchup, which is surprising and potentially a reason why the Unchained was not as popular as the previous YCS, where it took the #1 spot in the top cut, and now it fell to like the 4th or the 5th spot. And it's like, okay, maybe like tech cards like this, as well as people being prepared for the deck, is finally contributing to the deck's downfall. Next are some of the board wipes. Evenly Matched was very, very popular, especially against big board decks like the Rescue Ace, which I imagine actually have dropped the combo-heavy Omni Negates. So, like, you know, previously they're playing things like Jet Synchron to go into Baron de Fleur, and they were also being able to potentially set up a Borreload Savage Dragon, but now that's just not really a thing anymore. People are just realizing, hey, the deck already does what it does very well by setting up 4 and just having, like, SP Little Knight and Soft Negates and just, like, playing the game in a grind game situation, rather than playing bricks like Jet Synchron. But then players have also realized that Rescue Ace players are thinking exactly that, and they're like, hey, I'm just going to own your board with Evenly Matched. Now, it's not by far the, you know, auto win button that you would think it is. There are ways for the Rescue Ace to just rebuild their board, so you do have to capitalize on that while skipping your battle phase. But again, it was interesting to see that a lot of players were actually playing Evenly Matched. This is a decent card. It's good against rogue matchups as well. So, you know, why not just start sticking this card back in the deck? Sometimes it really catches your opponent off guard, and then you just win the game. Then the other board breaker / quick play spell card is Cosmic Cyclone. This card is nuts. Going first, going second. Going first, you can hit purely My Friend, the field spell. You can hit the Cheerlements, Pearl Rhino. You can also hit Celiac going second. There are a lot of matchups that care about the cards being banished. Even Unchained, you know, hitting their cards that they set and then target off of Shavara or the other monsters. And then going second, it's also effective. Highly effective, obviously, against decks like Labyrinth as well. You know, you can chain this in response to one of their traps, so they cannot chain the lady effect to set something like a Big Welcome Labyrinth. And then, of course, this card is just generically good as a quick play spell. People realized, hey, this actually hits a lot of things like Runic Fountain as well. They weren't expecting Bestial Runic per se, but Runic Stun was a deck that was kind of popular on the regional circuit recently, so people were saying, hey, Cosmic Cyclone actually does something, whereas Lightning Storm doesn't really do enough. There are a lot of cards like Hugin that protect from destruction. More importantly, as we discussed earlier, the existence of CENTUR-IONs means that cards like Cosmic Cyclone actually can disrupt this and prevent you from getting Calamity Lock, period, because you're able to snipe either the CENTUR-ION monster treating itself as a continuous trap card in the spell trap zone, or better yet, the stand-up CENTUR-ION, which is the trigger effect, allowing them to synchro summon during your turn when they special summon a monster out from their spell or trap zone. So having Cosmic Cyclone as an additional interruption just to stop that deck from getting their cheesy auto wins is very, very crucial, and players said, hey, you know what, this card is just downright better than cards like Lightning Storm because it has so much more utility, and I can actually prevent myself from auto-losing to a deck like CENTUR-ION. So yeah, needless to say, Cosmic Cyclone was very powerful in this format. And then last of all was actually Crossout Designator. There were a lot of players actually still on this card. They realized that this card had some utility. I think that this card is getting better and better as the format progresses in a diverse meta where a lot of people are playing hand traps and a variety of board breakers, and it turns out that certain decks are weak against certain hand traps, so having that padding against the opponent's cards is really, really important. In a deck like CENTUR-ION, this card could be somewhat useful as well because you're preventing your opponent from actually interacting with you. You're preventing your opponent from using things like Cosmic Cyclone or Ghost Ogre or whatever the heck people are playing nowadays to stop you from winning. In combo-heavy decks, you know, you can just decide Drone Lockbird, and then you have something to, in addition to Called by the Grave, to actually stop Drone Lockbird, which prevents you from playing, period. So people are like, hey, you know what, this card is something that I want to try siding in going first again. So people have been testing it at YCS and as well as the regionals that were going on this weekend. So yeah, that was about Why Says Bologna, what I saw based on the stream and the deck profiles and just people commenting on social media. What do you guys think? Were there any cards that we missed here that you think were also prevalent in the metagame? And what do you think about the metagame as a whole as it's trending towards this diverse meta, you know, with all these new spicy tech cards and older cards coming out of the closet? Let us know in the comments below. And yeah, subscribe to support the channel. We'll see you all in the next video. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.